What comes to mind when you hear the word simplicity? Laughter of a child, a golden sunset perhaps. Probably not your retirement plan. But I want to change that. You see, over 54% of retirees report a lower standard of living in retirement. The number one reason? They started too late in their accumulation. That's right, over half of all retirees wish they'd started sooner. As a financial advisor, I'm really a professional decision-making helper. I started my senior year of college, and I made the mistake of telling people what I knew the way it had been taught to me. Way too complex. My mentor, my father, suggested that I simplify and that recognize that failure is just feedback. And people were telling me they didn't understand, but they didn't say it that way. They said it by saying, well, we're going to need to think about that. And then they'd put it off, likely becoming one of the 53%. Did I fail them? So I set out to study simplicity. And three figures stood out for me. The first, Frank Lloyd Wright, famous American architect. He coined the term organic architecture. What he meant by that was integrating his buildings that he designed into their surroundings and nature. He started a new era in architecture. The second, Stephen Jobs, who famously insisted on simplicity in function, in form, in marketing, and in life. You know, there's a third figure too you probably don't know. His name was Joseph Eichler. Joseph Eichler in midlife had lived in a Frank Lloyd Wright home in Hillsborough, California, and was so impressed by the features in that home that he quit his job and became a home builder. He would build 11,000 homes, creating a new era in his industry. So as I studied how these three people leveraged simplicity to change their industries, it was intriguing. I thought, gee, if I can grab just a little bit of that, I think that I could communicate better with my clients. And Stephen Jobs, in fact, said, you know, you have to get your thinking clean. Here we go. You have to get your thinking clean. Simple can be harder than complex. Anyone who's ever wrote a TED Talk probably knows that, right? Got to condense it. And you have to work hard to keep your thinking clean, to get your thinking clean, to keep it simple. He lived by this. He also said of Joseph Eichler, his houses were smart and cheap and good, and they provided clean lines and simple designs for low-income people. Smart, cheap, good, clean design, simple. Well, it sounds like a blueprint for a tech company, doesn't it? Sounds like the exact products that he produced at Apple Computer Company. He had lived in a home when he was 5 years old, and he attributes his love of simplicity to that home. His friend Steve Wozniak just lived a few blocks away in an original Eichler-built home. The Jobs home was very similar, but wasn't built by Joseph Eichler. And today those homes are called Leichlers, and they go for over $1,000 a square foot. They're very sought after. And so Joseph Eichler, here we have Frank Lloyd Wright, we have Joseph Eichler, and we have Stephen Jobs. All three leveraged simplicity to change their industries. And so my hope was that a little bit of that would be valuable for me. And I'll share some of those things and my experiences with it with you. And I think maybe by the end of the talk here, you'll also have some applications for it. I call it the process that I went through, applied simplistics. Not really a word, but it is for me. Because I took the points that my clients had trouble understanding, and I worked hard to make them simpler. And so I'll share with you a little bit of what I've done there. I like to use, the worst part about the retirement is they didn't start soon enough, so I started there. I had to convince clients, you have to get going now. And it's not really even, doesn't matter how much. What's most important is the habit they develop when they do it. It will carry them on and help them be successful. So let me share with you the magic of the ruler. This is a meter stick, 39 and 3/8 inches long, almost 40. Coincidentally, we work about 40 years in our careers, don't we? The trouble is, we don't start saving for retirement the first day we go to work. In our 20s, our largest single expense, education costs, right? We put it off. But the rule of thumb here is by age 30, you should have 1 year's salary saved in long-term retirement savings. And then in our 30s, we're building. We're building careers, we're building businesses, and we're building families perhaps. The convenient time to save comes to no one. We put it off again. And who wants to work 40 years, right? We get a lot of requests. People want to retire early, enjoy life. Sometimes they want to retire a lot early. Well, guess what? It's not enough time for the account to grow. The client has two choices. They can work longer, or they can start sooner, right? Who can start sooner than today? Anyone? Right? Okay, trick question. That ship sailed right out into Lake Superior. We can't do anything about that. What we can do something about is how much we put in. And it's going to have to be more if we delay, if we want that early retirement. So you can't start late and leave early. That's a recipe for disaster. And by age 60, we should have 8 times our salary saved in long-term savings. By retirement date, or age 67, it should be 10 times the amount that you earn annually should be in that account. Just a rule of thumb. I see people out there calculating, where am I at here? Right? So I ask my clients, how does your plan measure up? So the wisdom of the ruler is helpful with us. The next hack that I came up with, I call them communication hacks. This is applied simplicity used for inflation. This is the number. Now, 89% of retirees worry about inflation, particularly post-COVID, right? We hear about it all the time on the news. And the old me would have shown a chart or a graph to illustrate the effects of inflation. But with applied simplicity, I like to use a postage stamp. This stamp is 10 cents. I love these stamps. I collected them when I was a kid. This is the lunar landing. I was a little kid when we had a man on the moon. It's quite fascinating. I loved it. And so this was one of my favorite stamps, but it also teaches us the lesson that today in the United States, it costs 73 cents to send a stamp. Well, that's 10 to 73 over a little over 50 years. That's about 4.5%. Now the consumer price index, our measure of inflation, runs about 4% during that same period of time. I say it's close enough to keep those charts and graphs hidden away, and let's talk about stamps. People never forget this. We land our point. But the important question here is, what do you suppose stamps are going to cost in the future, and what's your plan to pay for them? How are we ever, if all your investments and your insurance and your savings are based on a 10-cent world, how are you ever going to retire into a 73-cent world? And so this puts a fine point on it. And they should be concerned about inflation. But this is how we understand it without the charts and graphs. The next is investment risk. And we'll talk about investment risk because my industry has all kinds of stuff on investment risk. Correlation coefficients, standard deviations, Sharpe ratios, beta, and lots of confusing charts and graphs. But for my clients, we have a lot of fun talking about investment risk. with a bottle of ketchup and a bottle of hot sauce. You know, ketchup represents blue chip companies, large companies, the Procter & Gamble's of the world, that pay dividends regularly. And they're probably not going to double in size, but they're not going to go away either, are they? They're around for a long time. Most trusts and foundations base their investments on blue chip stocks. And so here we identified the blue chips as ketchup. And almost everybody can have ketchup, right? I have friends that like ketchup so much they have ketchup on their ketchup, right? And so, but hot sauce is a different matter. If you were to have the hot sauce in the same proportion as you do the ketchup, well, you'd be in for some stomach trouble as a minimum, right? Now, some of the mutual funds, they'll mix the two together and have blended funds where they're toning down the risk of that pepper sauce with that ketchup, and which is useful in an asset allocation program. You know, and here's where an advisor can help you manage risk in the investment process through selection and allocation. How much do we put in to the ketchup? How much do we put into the hot sauce? And hot sauce is more like small companies, right? Emerging markets, sectors, metals, cyber currency, right? And so that's a great way to understand. For years, clients would come in my office wringing their hands. People get a little excited when they need to make a decision. They know I'm going to ask them to make a decision, even though I'm a professional decision-making helper. And we try to put them at ease, but they know I'm going to ask them. And they know they're not going to understand some things. This really helps pave the way for a better decision. And so we've had a lot of fun with the hot sauce. My clients never forget this. You know, how's that ketchup doing over there? Yeah, it's doing good. And so this is one of the ways that I used applied simplistics for the investment risk area. The next area we'll talk about, and the inflation with the stamps. These are readily recognized by the client. It's not threatening. And so I land my point. The next topic is volatility. Now, risk and volatility get confused a lot. Before I go on, you don't want to mix up too much of that hot sauce in the ketchup because you'll get it indigestion in your investment. I call that Investigestion. And the only known cure is a caring advisor who can help you out with that. So, but you don't want Investigestion. And so volatility is a different matter. Volatility is when we have an 800-point drop in the market in one day. It didn't have anything to do with the investment that you had. Those stocks in your portfolio were probably fine. They could have been all blue chips, high quality. They didn't go down. The market did. And so I use this analogy with clients. This is my applied simplicity for volatility. And in this case, most tuna fish in the store today about $3 a can. Is that about right? But suppose you went into the store the next week and it said tuna fish, $8 a can. As a consumer, how do you respond to that? You're probably thinking chicken or maybe tofu, right? But you go in the next week and it said chicken, $3 or 3 cans for $1. Well, they changed the deal. That's a better deal. But check the date, right? We don't want any old tuna fish. But if you like tuna fish, you fill up the pantry when it's 3 for $1. But here's the secret. It's all tuna fish, okay? Stocks should be looked at like tuna fish. Why do we feel good to pay $8 a piece and they go on sale for 3 for $1? We don't touch them. In fact, we're fearful at that point. And so this helps retrain. This is called reframing, right? So we reframe what it is into a product that the client's familiar with, and that's the magic of applied simplicity. In following the greats that I mentioned. In fact, we had a jump from Frank Lloyd Wright through Joseph Eichler into Stephen Jobs. It jumped industries. That was encouraging to me because I wanted to use it in my industry. And it worked well for me. Clients get it. We have a chuckle about it. It turns something that they were apprehensive about into something that we're now laughing with each other. But they get the point. Use the ruler to show why you have to start early. Because if we want to retire early, we can't start late. And there are two ways to store that money. That we can own something, or we can loan our money to someone. There's only two ways to store that money. And if we own something, it's like a business or a home. Who drove here today? See, so you have a car you own. What are our cars doing in the parking lot right now while we're in here? Depreciating. Our accountants in here. Well, that's right. We don't want our investments to depreciate, but certainly cars do. And so that's a risk of ownership, isn't it? And we don't have that risk when we loan our money. But loans are disguised. You give your money to a bank in a passbook account. They call it a deposit, but it's really a loan to that bank with a promise to repay. And the loans are safer, but they have a lower return historically, but it's guaranteed. And so global equity returns since World War II have averaged 10%. We saw that postal inflation is 4.5%. Fixed rate returns have been in the 4 to 5% range. If we want to stay away from the devastating effects of inflation, we must beat the inflation rate to have a real return. And so the ruler teaches us that we have to have that real return or we're going backwards in our purchasing power. It's what 90% of retirees today are fearful of. We use the ruler for start early and where to put our money, loan or own. And we use the stamps to show inflation and how we are to overcome that if we want to get a real return. The ketchup and the hot sauce tells us that we can manage risk through selection and allocation. And the tuna fish tells us that what should we do when there's a huge drop in the market? You know, there's, in a medical sense, you don't want to react to a medication, do you? You want to respond to a medication. And so I tell my clients, you need to respond to volatility changes. Don't react. And so the tuna fish teaches us that as well, that we need to respond and not react. And I get calls from my client, oh, the market went down this far. What should I do? What do I say? Tuna fish, exactly. And they say, that's right, I should be buying. Or at the very least, do nothing. We've never had a decrease like that in the market that didn't come back and go on to a new high. It's never happened. Patience will bring you there. What comes to mind when you hear the word simplicity? Thank you.